And now we're recording. I would kindly ask everyone to, I don't know, mute all folks. So everyone is muted, and please unmute yourself only if you're asking a question. This way we can have, clarity and purity of sound, and also we're going to be recording for other folks. So please be kind to others. Okay, so I'm going to kick off. I'm going to greet and welcome everyone. I'm Gene Gendel. This is a large-scale Scrum of New York City meetup, virtual. Having gone virtual actually before COVID unfortunately struck us. So we actually had some good traction with virtual events since the beginning of this year. We are the largest and the fastest growing large-scale Scrum community, although stuff that we talk about from time to time isn't less specific, as I'm sure some of you have seen and heard some great speakers coming and entertaining our crowd. Today, I would like to share some of the information with you, specifically with regards to identifying, defining, mixing and matching various communication style, communication techniques that could be very instrumental for large-scale Scrum, Lean, and Agile product development. Okay. So first, obviously, I will spend no time presenting myself. You can always reach out to me and we can discuss anything that's of interest to you about my personal experience. I would like to share these assets with everyone up front. First of all, I'm very easily accessible via email, LinkedIn, my own site. As obviously this meetup, if you haven't joined through the meetup, but maybe directly through a Zoom channel, please make a note that we have a meetup, and you can always exchange with others as well as reach out to me directly through the meetup. I also offer my free Slack channel for those that are interested in communicating fast, quick, and maybe you have questions you want to raise privately. I'm happy to. I usually reply fast. This event, once it's recorded, will be posted on this link. Right now, you can probably follow it. There will be nothing there, just some reading references, but we'll post a video there as well as the deck. I'm gonna make my deck available as well. Just in passing, I'm gonna mention something that has just been released last week, Certified LESS Practitioner. It's a fully, it's a full flavor LESS training that is available now online. There are some limitations, that's why it's called provisional, but you can read up more about it on LESS.work site. And there are some events scheduled by me and other trainers. Now, I'm gonna dive right into the subject, and I will first refer to this pretty well-known diagram. I personally came to learn its meaning from Alistair Coburn's book, which I read years ago. It talks about information radiation flow and heat of communication. So if you are familiar with the graph, I'm sure my interpretation would be just a replay for you, but those that haven't seen the graph, you will probably appreciate the eloquency and accuracy of this. You can see the two graphs. One is lower, one is higher, and the x-axis represents communication channel and temperature of a communication, whereas the y-axis is communication effectiveness. Of course, if it's a unidirectional, unilateral communication through paper, it's the coldest and it's the least in richness, in effectiveness. And as it becomes two-way, it becomes a little warmer. And once you step up from null Q&A to Q&A, like a bilateral interactive, obviously it grows almost exponentially and goes much higher. Now you may argue that with virtual reality, we will fall today somewhere in between two people actively and anxiously discussing something at the whiteboard, and actually people doing this on the phone, right? So virtual reality does bring us closer, although with face and visuals, it gets even better. But it's not as rich as mano-a-mano, face-to-face. And obviously, when we're going to go augmented reality, hopefully in a couple of years, we will have even better situation, hopefully. Still, I would bet not as good as real physical face-to-face, but close to it. Why is it important? Well, because when we talk about communication channels, communication media is important, right? And today we're all remote. Of course, we need to make that as a footnote, as a fine print. Being remote by mandate, not by choice, obviously creates creates a constraint on us, puts a constraint on us. But this is something we just have to improvise with. So there's some other techniques that we can improvise, like mirror board, combination of Zoom Teams, other virtual reality that we have done an experiment with. In fact, we have an event coming up in a few weeks discussing it. Now, what we're not explicitly covering today, so this is just, we have only 1 hour. We're not going to cover explicitly some of the well-known and structured events. I will leverage Scrum and large-scale Scrum as an example. We're not going to be talking about product backlog refinement. We're not going to discuss sprint planning, and we're not going to discuss a sprint review and a retrospective. These are well-known and well-structured events that we obviously can rely on. Now we will, however, mention them in the end, how these in combination with some additional events that we are going to cover, some additional communication channels, could make your overall communication much richer and much more effective. But these are almost taken de facto. Now we are going to discuss some of these, right? We're going to talk about these. We're bucking them into 6 types, although there's some very fuzzy line between these 6 types of information radiation, content exchange, communication learning, right? So that's what we're going to focus on today. Now, first, I would like to say something that I think it's pretty important, right? In the context of today's discussion, these communication events, these communication channels will not be effective and will not be relevant under certain conditions. And we should say not completely relevant, but less effective and less impactful. Let me explain what I mean by this. So imagine you have Agile teams. It doesn't matter if it's a Scrum team or a Kanban team or a team that does very bare bones XP, or maybe a combination of some of these very lean, very authentic techniques, or maybe a large-scale Scrum, X number of teams put together. You would expect that these teams would be working in a very customer-centric way, and there's a direct communication channel between teams, delivery teams, and a customer. Now, this will not work well if you got additional organizational roadblocks and structures and towers that sit around and about and in between. Now, these kind of layers, additional layers, will make this initial, dotted line communication channel almost impossible. Well, what you will most likely see happening is this very convoluted, very indirect communication and information flow from Gemba, where action takes place, from teams to real customers. So with that, I'm going to obviously question, and you should question, I invite you to do the same. We should question customer centricity in product development here, because with this much convolution and in between layering, I just can't imagine customer centricity being effective. I will also question longevity, duration of feedback loops between customers and developers. Obviously, adaptiveness of the entire process becomes a question. How fast, how agile teams can react, teams can be with respect to customers' requests, changing requests. And of course, you can argue what has really changed from the beginning, from old traditional legacy time. So we strongly do not recommend this setup if we are interested in improving communication flow. Now, also speaking of avoiding gated and filtered communication channels, these some of the cartoons that may shine extra light on some of the not recommended ways of setting up teams with respect to customers. Here's an example. This one is, a product owner really isn't a product owner, and communication flow, data exchange flow between real teams and real customer would be severely hindered if we had this setup where you had a translation layer between so-called a scrum master, but really not, more of a project manager, and a product owner, really not, but more of a business analyst. So there's a communication channel breach right here. This is another way to illustrate the same, where you have maybe potentially a great product owner in place. However, him or her being so far away, so remote from real teams and real Gemba, where action is, with communication flow, with data flow, information flow becoming very hindered. Okay, so we obviously do not want to see this setup. So any discussions of communication or communication effectiveness would be much less appropriate, much less relevant if you had these organizational setup, these types of organizational setup. Now, in large scale product development, in lean product development, and large scale Scrum is being one of them, we make a very strong emphasis on this very simple but very strong technique, just talk. And this, there's an extreme version of it. It's called just scream. It shouldn't really become a point of contingency for us, because we are not trying to be overly ironic or facetious. We are really stressing the importance of teams being able to communicate directly by just talking to each other. Not even through email, not even through IM, unless it is absolutely necessary, but just talking. Of course, in physical setup, it's, when we're all together collocated, it's much easier. But when we're virtually distributed, really nothing should prevent us. There should be no guideline that strongly prevents us from going on virtual, on video, and having a direct exchange. Now, I would like to bring to your attention this very important communication channel that sometimes is being trivialized and downplayed. All others are probably much more common sense, like a product owner should be directly speaking to customers and to high management and to a scrum master who is a team level coach, as well as to teams. But this dotted line is oftentimes being undervalued and trivialized. Teams should be speaking directly to customers or users. If it's an external product development, it would be a customer. If it's an internal product development, like HR legacy database rewrite, or maybe some sort of like an internal audit system, it would be an internal user. But the stress is made on direct communication, direct alignment between customers and users on one end and teams on the other. There are no translation layers that sit in between. Now, we also very strongly delineate between prioritization, requests going from users and customers into a product owner, and from the product owner into teams in the form of prioritization and clarification. It is this specific communication channel that should be very short and very wide. It should be a broadband communication channel that allows information flow from users to customers. In fact, backwards, there should be an arrow pointing backwards. I'll probably correct it on the slide. No conduits in between, no translation layers in between. Okay, so this is critical to understand. Now, I would like you to, maybe make a pause, and if you have any history background, you will probably smile if you just remember political history. I want us to make clear delineation between the two. Please do not confuse what sometimes people very wrongly perceive as effective planning or effective information exchange. Big room planning, which could be you may have a very large room full of very influential people, very well sponsored event with great speeches and great presentations being done by people that are very far away from Gemba, from reality, from where action is. So, and in fact, in my personal experience, I've been approached more than once asking for recommendations. Do recommend a big room planning in our setup and for our purposes. My strong recommendation was always, I'm very skeptical about it. And the reason why I'm very skeptical about it is because in these events, typically people that have um, least involvement with product development have the highest voice. And oftentimes these events are being run by, managers and PMO structures. So these are not very supportive of lean, agile product development. Now, do not confuse this with this. We strongly recommend open space. So if you think of, if you like going to, to a car show or to a job fair or to a technology fair, you will probably understand you can associate it with this type of event. This type of event brings together actual doers. There are clearly some senior management in the room, people that are maybe in charge of budgeting and finance and vendor management, or just people that are more influential. Definitely product owners. If it's if it's just one one team scrum or a large scale scrum, it will be just one product owner. If you have a much bigger event, sometimes we have those. Maybe you have more business people, but these are real doers. These are primarily real doers that come together and discuss matters that are more relevant to technical execution, but also to a large extent to strategic planning. So things like forecasting, strategic discussions, budgeting will typically happen in large-scale Scrum during initial product backlog refinement session. And we strongly recommend using open space, considered as a tool or technique, if you will, to support the event. All other product backlog refinement sessions would be strongly recommended to be done in this way, in open space. Even if you're online virtually today, there are ways to improvise and to do open space by using these virtual canvases. There are indefinite, almost you can indefinite scroll. There are ways to do it. As long as there is a will, there is a way. As well as sprint planning, as well as sprint reviews. So do not confuse big room planning with an open space event or open space meeting. We certainly recommend the latter to experiment because we have real doers, real gambles taking place. Of course, people that are there from senior management are also influential people, but they are selected, chosen people. These tend to be much cheaper, if that matters at all, by a magnitude than these large, big room planning events that fly from all over the globe. Senior managers that come into the room all at once, but don't have any real doers. Maybe some first, second, third level managers, translation leaders, but no real doers. Moving on to the power towers. So again, before we say what's good, let's be clear about what's not recommended. So imagine this, and hopefully you can read the slide. It's a graphic that's also available in large. There's a bigger and more high resolution version of it. Imagine, so this persona right there, it reads chief sheriff PowerPoint architect. Now, if you have an organization that has a apex structured tower and has a senior person up there who is like some sort of a chief architect who doesn't really have his or her hands in code, doesn't really actually do development, but has a lot to say about how how development should take place, how architecture should look like. We sometimes refer to this person as a PowerPoint architect or an architect astronaut. There's a great write-up, I forget the author of that exposes this. Now, why is this important? Because in this situation, this entire organizational structure is very locally optimized for its own existence. And these people, of course, are very local optimized to amplify, to signify their own importance. And sometimes it comes with personal insecurity because they don't really work on teams and they can really actually deliver value. Just as a footnote, I can say something else. If you have just the concept, just understand the concept of a power tower and a country club of best practices and best of the best individuals that are sometimes hands off. Most of the times are they're hands off, but they tell others how to do their work. If you have an agile coaching power tower, it is also a challenge. Just make it as a footnote. It's not directly related to this conversation, but keep in mind this is a remedy. This is almost a guaranteed local optimization 101. This sort of tower will be locally optimized for its own existence. What will be even more challenging if it's put inside of this kind of structure, because now it's the local optimization with the local optimized tower. And in my experience, coaching function will be significantly undermined and trivialized. Agile improvements will be very undermined and trivialized if this organizational setup was implemented. But of course, the main point here is that think of this from a different, let's approach this from a different angle. If we consider architecture as a component, which it is, it's a system component, it's not a cross-cutting feature, then implement this idea of a component mentorship. If this person actually became a component mentor, assuming that he or she was still skilled and had some expertise to share, it would fundamentally change the situation. It would be a significant improvement to organizational design overall, but also to communication flow. Now, instead of being, go tell others what to do, this person would become an educator, and mentor, and a teacher, and it would provide expertise and knowledge in the form of teaching, educating, mentoring other individuals, as well as teams. So with that comes a very important element, right? You have to be careful how you approach, how you offer this to people, because once you start advocating the idea of becoming a mentor and an educator and a teacher, for many people, it may become almost an invitation to work themselves out of their own job. They may feel fear that if I become a mentor and a teacher, if I teach others how to do what I do best, then I will become less important. I will trivialize my own existence. And that's something you have to address head on, you organizationally, of course, and you have to separate job and salary safety from role safety. So although the role of a component owner or component manager should go away potentially and become and turn into the role of a component mentor, it should not be confused with job security. That person should not be feared or concerned that because he or she teaches others how to do their work, their job is going to go away. Okay, so this important communication channel, this is an important communication media, because through dojos, through mentoring sessions, and through potentially internal workshops and classrooms, a component mentor can educate on how to do things other individuals and entire teams. So component mentorship is one important way to flow information, to disseminate information and knowledge. I like this phrase, sharing is caring, right? So if you care about someone, you want to share what you have. Hopefully it's good stuff that you're sharing. Now, this is not a good thing. And we have this term being grossly used and overused traditionally by organizations. It's a shared resource. It's being presented almost as if it's a good thing. Of course, with this comes those of you that are familiar with lean and lean product development, and maybe appreciate teaching and content knowledge content of Kanban and economics of lean product development and workflow will appreciate what I'm about to say here. When someone is shared as a resource, most likely his or her cycle time goes up. Lead time is going to go up. Multitasking is almost guaranteed. Task switching is almost guaranteed. Average time spent on individual task as it flows through the queue is going to go up. Throughput is going to go lower. queue size is going to grow. And with that, of course, if you're familiar with Little's law, some other problems will arise as well. So there are many problems we know, we have seen, and we all acknowledge that come with extensive sharing of resources, or pulling people in different directions apart. Now the question comes, what do you do if you have just one person or few people that are knowledgeable and skilled in a specific discipline, or business domain, and you want this to be amplified, you want others to learn as well? Well, we need to approach this from a slightly different angle. Now, one of the ways to do it is to leverage, where's my cursor here, is to leverage this person. So definitely do not recommend this, is to leverage this person's knowledge and make this person bring this knowledge onto other teams. But how would you really do it? Would you just ask this person to split his or her capacity 3, 4, 5 different ways and face all of the above mentioned problems? Or is there a different way to do it? Now, for example, in large scale Scrum, we strongly recommend to introduce the concept of a developer traveler. What does it mean? This person does have his own home. His own home is his own team. And on a good day, on an average day, in an average sprint, this person belongs to his or her team, to his team. Now, this person does have a responsibility, a dual responsibility, to pick up his bags and go to another team and settle there for a couple of sprints to disseminate his own knowledge and expertise and functional, domain knowledge. But this does not mean this person will stay there forever. They are meant to deliver content. They're meant to teach, to coach locally, and then come back to their own team. Now, there is no resource sharing. And by the way, people are not resources; they are intellectual assets. If we treat people as resources, as staplers and computers and paper, this is just a very traditional, very legacy way to address people. So in any case, the human asset, the intellectual asset, will belong to one team at any point in time, but they can go from team to team. So if team A owns this person, but team B really needs his expertise, this person will go to team B and will stay there for a while and teach, maybe through pair programming or through mob programming, or maybe through some mentoring sessions. Will teach what they know, what he knows, and then maybe he'll go to team C and do the same over there. So this is called traveling. He travels. Product development group. In large scale Scrum, we call it less product development group. So we have up to 8 teams. This person may potentially go to every team and do the needed, and then come back to his own team. Nobody really cares about, oh my God, my team is going to lose a traveler. That means our velocity is going to drop. Well, first of all, we don't emphasize the significance of velocity as much. We shouldn't, because it's just an output. If the overall outcome is still low, who cares how high your velocity is? But also, more importantly, if you do care about velocity, the overall less product group should eventually benefit from this cross-pollination and teaching. So you look at the overall velocity. Yes, the question usually comes, well, can we rely the teams estimate the same way? Yes, because the way we do things in less, but we're not discussing it today. In any case, traveling is a great way to cross-pollinate and bring knowledge from team to team. And this is considered, of course, to be a communication channel, way of communicating knowledge out. Now, almost supplementary or complementary to this, if you will, there is a way we scavenge, there is a way we steal knowledge in a good way from other teams. We call it scouting. So imagine team A discovered that team B is doing some very effective pair programming, and they just want to look it up and just steal some great ideas. Well, then team A may send off one of their own scouts to team B to observe how they do their events and how they work day to day. So this doesn't have to be for an entire sprint. You can just send off one of your own people to sit in, to watch, to observe, and maybe take notes and bring it back to their own team. Of course, there is no worry, there is no concern that, hey, your team is looking at what my team does, you mind your own business. There's no such thing in large scale Scrum, nor should there be any problem with this, if multiple teams work on the same product for the same product owner out of the same backlog, it's all shared content, it's all shared purpose and goals. So this scouting approach is a quick and dirty way to go in, just plagiarize, bastardize, steal someone else's great technique and bring it back to your own team. This way of communicating solves those immediate tactical needs. Whereas with traveling, you may argue this is a more strategic, more long-lasting way to share knowledge and cross-pollinate. Scouting could be a quicker way to do it, but you can obviously mix and match both. So lastly, before we talk about how we can further mix and match these, let's talk about another very powerful and very undermined oftentimes and misunderstood communication media that we prefer, that we recommend in large scale product development and lean and agile development. Now, I'm gonna start off with this, call it a cartoon, call it an implied version of irony. So if you take your existing organizational structure and flip it on its side, 90 degrees usually, right? If we know the geometry, you flip it 90 degrees, and then relabel it into, it's a really well-known these days, probably actually unknown and misused term called a chapter. So if you take an organizational structure, existing traditional structure, and flip it on its side 90 degrees, and now call it a chapter, or a chapter effectively means to be a community, right? Then you probably misunderstood what the small company had in mind almost a decade ago, right? When they were like 50, 60 man operation. This is a misunderstanding of the purpose, right? We are not to confuse this with a real community. So a real community, first, it must be only by volunteering. You cannot force people into a community. Just like this meetup, right? We are part of the same large-scale Scrum meetup. No one is being held here by force, and no one is being asked to leave unless, we haven't had any cases in the last 6 years, people being asked to leave because they did something wrong. It's by volunteering only. In fact, by volunteering is one of the key adoption principles in large-scale Scrum. Now, any community should be able to it can be created on demand if there is a need, and it could be sunset if there is no longer need. That's the definition of a community. Maybe, at one point, this entire community will become less of a less interest to people, so will cease to exist. A community is meant to be only for cross-functional learning. Maybe we can come up, so the output of community work, the output of community activities could be something like a guideline or a great recommendation or a great practice. In fact, there are no best practices, there are some great ones. Yes, by all means, this could be the output of the community, but it should not become a condescending way to enforce and implement decisions that are made within a community. So the reason why people create communities is because they see true value. And of course, naturally, common sense would be, hey, if you support a community, if you come to a community, if you dedicate your time to a community, you will most likely be willing to take something from the community back to your respective teams. But do not confuse it with an existing org structure being flipped on its side and not being called a chapter or community. Community should have no reporting structure, obviously no performance appraisals, no hierarchy. You may argue, hey, well, who's going to lead it? Who's going to be a spearhead? Who is going to be someone in charge? Well, definitely not in charge, but yeah, you may find a natural leader, someone who maybe knows. In fact, my next slide will give you some ideas who could become potentially a community lead. But please understand that community is a great media. It's a great media to exchange knowledge, to share information, to just to cross-pollinate and teach and learn, teach others and learn by yourself. Coffee, beer, raffles, and networking are typically the attributes of a community. Those are the indications that you really got it right. If it's by mandate, if it's only one manager speaks, and everyone else listens and says, yes, yes, we are going to implement it. This is not a community. This is used to be a vertical organizational tower, now flipped on its side. It defeats the purpose. Right. So, and the last point. So, going back to these six buckets, six figures that we had at the beginning, I can give you a couple of tips here how these could be mixed and matched in a way that they complement each other. Do not contradict each other. Well, first, as I mentioned, traveling and scouting are two great ways to learn and teach, respectively, depending on what you do. And I've seen teams doing this very effectively, especially if they have, within large-scale Scrum, it becomes almost second nature. Why these are complementary? Because one, I think it's a slightly longer lasting impact, and it takes a little longer, like traveling. It could take up to a couple of sprints worth of effort, whereas scouting could be like a quick and dirty kill, right? You send someone off to another team, and this person will scout, and they will sit in the internal design session, perhaps, or just will look over someone else's shoulder and learn something on the fly. So those two are really easily mixable and matchable. They are very, very complementary. This is pretty important also. So we talked about component mentorship, and this person no longer becoming the Ruby lover, or any technology lover, is no longer becoming and the owner or the manager who will just cover up everything they do with their hands, with their arms, elbows, and will not let anyone touch it. Sometimes we hear, oh, this is a private code policy we have to respect. In my experience, the majority of those cases are due to the fact that there is an organizational structure that prevents this from happening. So it's almost like a turf protection policy or politics, if you will. It's really not, there was nothing private about that code. It's just lack of trust and local optimization by a person who historically has been owning it. Now, if you turn this person into a mentor and educator and make them educate and teach others, then of course, miraculously, this private code policy may go away, but you have to give something in return. So this person, if he or she gives up this authoritative position, they may need to be ensured that they will not be trivialized, and they will not be their presence will be no less trivial in weeks or months to come. You have to make sure they have some degree of security, not role security anymore, but job security. But why is there an arrow going back and forth? Because sometimes, and more often than not, this more senior, more seasoned person could become a great community lead, because they have so much knowledge in a specific for a specific content, they can become an effective community lead. We can take an example of, maybe used to be a lead architect who wouldn't allow anyone change anything with respect to architecture. Now he can become architecture community lead. Or UI UX designer, like a lead UI UX designer who used to be a sole decision maker on what UI UX design would look like, because he or she was the only one person who would speak to business. Well, no longer, but you have to give something in return. Of course, sense of job security, but this person could become a very effective community lead. You got to be careful though, however, you don't want this to turn that, the previous slide when you had the apex tower flipped on its side, now becoming, vertical structure from horizontal structure called a community, from the vertical structure called just a reporting structure. You don't want to see that. But with proper organizational improvement, with organizational design, this could be very, very feasible. This person could be a great community lead. Open space, I think we mentioned this. Open space is a great technique, not to be confused with big room planning or off-site big room planning, where you have typically, who do you send off to those events? Managers and PMO, and they kind of in a silo discuss things that are away from Gemba. real doers, real developers are rarely come there. So now this event, this technique, open space, is great for anything that has to do with just, if you need more people involved. For example, in large scale Scrum, initial product backlog refinement session, ongoing refinement sessions from sprint to sprint, planning sessions, review sessions could be very effectively supported with an open space technique. Of course, Just Talk supports all of these. And I must say, between these few and the existing events that we should all be aware of, sprint planning, backlog refinement sessions, retrospectives, daily scrums, now creates a pretty wide array, pretty rich gamut of various communication channels and styles. I've seen quite a few aha moments from people when they would just assess what we have discussed today, and then we'll raise the question, well, when do you discuss, and then give like an array of things what they typically need to do. And after a few minutes, they realize, oh, well, that seamlessly falls into some of these events. What becomes another aha moment is when people realize there are so many other events and communication that takes place today that is really, it seems to be mandatory traditionally, but not critical, and quite frankly, trivial, and even counterproductive. It takes away from individuals' capacity and attention span, and there's just not good events to have, like status meetings, status calls, sometimes overly abundant, excessive mandatory scrum of scrums that turns into a scrum of scrums and scrum of scrums. It turns into another coordination discipline that leads to local optimization by scrum masters that discuss things that probably not up their alley. Like they start doing coordination as opposed to just stepping back and let developers talk to one another. So these are the the bare bones types of communication channels or media, if you will, that you can add on to your standing Scrum and large-scale Scrum events that would make your communication pretty much richer and much more inclusive. So I'm going to stop at this point because I think that's exactly what I wanted to cover. I think I will budget it for 45 minutes or so. And I would like to open this up for questions. Perhaps people have any questions or recommendations or comments or anything else that comes to mind. Just my kind ask to everyone, unmute yourself only if you're asking a question, then mute back again so we have clean air. Anyone perhaps questions or?
Gene, this is repetitive, something that we discussed during the Let's Basics class. In managed services, where there are distributed teams, right? Your product owner sits in the US and the development team sits in Bangalore, India. Especially in this post-COVID scenario, right? Mm-hmm. Teams would be confused on what sort of communication type that they should adopt. So any thoughts on that?
Well, sure. I mean, you're somewhat privileged. It's privileged because we, like I said, we do discuss it more explicitly in less training. But I can give you a short version of the answer, right? So, what does not go away? The idea of these channels being effective and recommended. What may so what we do, as you probably recall, we make a clear delineation. In Scrum and in large-scale Scrum, there's a difference between geographic distribution, or sometimes called distributed Scrum, which is not a good thing, and multi-site development. And now we're discussing, like I said, pre-COVID situation. Let's make believe just for a minute. We're not forcefully separated, because what we have seen over decades, over years, it has nothing to do with COVID, right? In which case, the recommendation would be to not split teams. So you may have team A, team B, and team C on one side, and team D and E and F on the other side. Let's say Boston versus Bangalore, or New York versus Chennai. Now, that's different from having all 6 teams being split in 2 or 3 geographic regions, worse at different time zones. Now, with the former, yes, you can improvise, and at least you can work. We have multiple sites, but on each side you have a fully collocated teams. At least they are fully collocated in that same time zone. Because when we go into, now it almost becomes second nature, COVID, post-COVID scenario, then even if you're remote, if you're virtual, you still want to have as much time overlap as possible. So if you and I are separated, only united by 2-3 hours of work, it's a much more challenging than if I was in Bangalore, if you were in New York. Now, of course, it's also recommended to have a product owner to be collocated with at least one site, right? And again, the question often comes, what if it's not possible? I mean, I wouldn't say, I would never take this verbatim. I would say, why is it not possible? If you have, even if you have a product owner in the US, then at least there should be maybe 1 team or 2 teams that you can build on site, collocated with the product owner. Maybe other teams will be in a different site. As far as these communicational types, still would be stronger recommended. Now, I think the question is not so much geographic distribution, is the fact that now so many teams are remote, virtually. They work virtually, because we may be in the same town. We could be, same time zone, same city, same town, but still distributed. And when it comes to, I guess, what it comes to rescue here, and we have a lot of experimentation to do, is there are some other information radiation and virtual facilitation techniques that we could use. And we are experimenting with those during training, during coaching sessions, as well as during working sessions like dojos and test-driven development and other techniques that are very team specific.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind. This is Sharifa from Montreal.
Hi, Sharifa.
My question is really about, I'm doing fine, thank you, and you. So my question is really about this component mentor. Usually when you look at the discipline Agile delivery, they have an architecture owner part of the team and one of the leader of the team in the same way as the product owner and the Scrum Master. So given while we have probably thousands of components in an architecture, how do you leverage really that component mentor? Because it's going to be, I think, overwhelming. It's going then to be more sort of overhead rather than maybe someone helping the teams. Help me understand really this component mentor.
Well, there may not be a black and white or binary or dichotomous answer, yes and no, this is exactly how. Of course, with larger systems, with systems that have many more components, not just 3, 4, or 5, maybe dozens and dozens, things become more complex, and you may have to have some sort of a. So I want to be very careful here when we talk about a product development. If we come from the angle of product centricity and customer-centric development, we may end up excluding many components from the gamut of components that we need to do product development. If we have to approach it from the standpoint of what is Scrum or what is large-scale Scrum, it's a product-centric, customer-centric way to deliver value by doing product development. Now, if we don't change the dimension through which we come to support work, then of course we're not changing organizational structure. And then if so, then we will be in a situation where the same exec team most likely has something to do with all of those thousands of components. Maybe if we do product-centric development, it will not be a thousand of components, will be maybe 15 or 20 components. But even then, even though this argument is strong, I think it is pretty strong, because we really need to come from customer-centric perspective. The whole idea of chief architect, or the whole idea of head of architecture, and I think you introduced another role. Yeah, and there are other. I don't want to pass any judgment on other disciplines or frameworks, or recent partnerships. I think Discipline Agile and now PMI are in the same in the same partnership. I'm not sure how that worked out, but in any case, every time we put a non-doer in the role of a decision maker, we will end up with local optimization. This person is away from Gemba. This person is really not a doer. So their ability to make sound, conscious decisions will be very much diminished. So so if we do have someone who is actually skilled and very hands-on and very experienced with architecture, then we're not taking away from this person their ability to influence and educate, but we actually want to turn it into a teacher. So it's almost like you give man, if you give man fish, you will feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, you will feed him forever. So we want these smart individuals, presumably they're very smart and skilled, to become teachers and educators, as opposed to a place of retention of all of the knowledge. Okay, that's probably as close as I could get, although there could be some specifics we need to look at. And by the way, all of these discussions we usually take during like in large scale Scrum adoption. We have a prep phase. It could take up to a couple of months, where we have all of these discussions and decisions made, because we need to define a product development group up front, the blueprint, not the actual people, but the blueprint, what it should look like. So these questions are tackled head on. Thank you for the question, by the way.
Welcome.
I have a question.
Aaron, hi. Thank you.
Thank you. Fantastic talk today. Just a follow-up on the distributed, or on those, to be more specific, this new remote agile scrumming that I think we're all stumbling our way through. It seems like there's a couple of additional barriers that I think a lot of us aren't used to in terms of friction points. And I don't know if you have others, I assume you do, but it seems like the gaps in the you have to do a lot more one-on-one work with people. At the same time, you're, like in these Zoom sessions, and then at the same time, you're kind of doing, scrums, your scrum of scrums, et cetera, that whole tower. So it's almost like I'm finding there's this remote version of building that tower, if that makes any sense.
You open up the can of worms, Aaron. Let me try to explain something. Well, within the 5 minutes I have left, let me
Sorry.
pull up one interesting artifact for you guys. I think I'm still sharing my screen, right? So, am I still sharing? You should be able to see. Do you see what I'm sharing at the moment? It says less onion. Does it?
Yeah, still sharing.
Okay, excellent. Okay,
You can.
let me answer your question in a very almost. I don't want to say it's a binary answer, yes or no, but there is a high probability. There's a high risk as we have gone into this virtual reality. There is a much higher risk of inefficiency, monetary loss, financial sub-optimization, lack of visibility, lack of transparency, waste and overhead that would be due to the fact that the original organizational design is done in was made in a very legacy traditional way. Imagine and again, I'm not going to pass any judgment or make any comments about any other frameworks or ways of working. Let's call it ways of working. When you have an existing organizational structure that is prone to bureaucracy, overhead, dysfunction, and lack of transparency, whereas everyone is in the office and everyone pretty much sees each other. Imagine how much it's going to all amplify when everyone has gone virtual and you actually don't see people. Imagine how much inefficiency and counterproductivity we could expect from these complex, orthodox, convoluted organizational structures that companies have inherited over years, over decades. So this is almost like a hint. It's almost like a survival of the fittest. We are in complex time. We are going through challenging times. More lean, more fit, more nimble, more light-footed companies, structures, groups, teams, animals will probably have more resilience and more capability to survive and prosper over time. I'm not sure if this is a very loaded way to answer, but just to give you some insight on what I think a longer lasting impact of this could be. Now, the reason why I fired up this slide is because if we actually go to large scale Scrum rules, and rules are pretty, we consider them as hard rules. You have to do these in order for this to be called large scale Scrum. Otherwise, it's something else. Let me just, what am I looking at? Well, I'm looking for this, less rules, bullet number 2, in order for, and large scale Scrum is Scrum, right? So bullet number 2 is split in 4 different statements. Each team must be self-managed, cross-functional, co-located, and long-lived. Now, you can argue, and rightfully so, that co-located is one of the 4. It is not the most important. So if someone asks me, Gene, choose between these 4, what's more important to you? Being cross-functional, or being co-located, or being long-lived, or being self-managed? Well, I would say to me personally, number 1 and probably number 2 are much more important. And probably number 4, actually. I would say with some potential improvements in technology, virtual augmented reality, co-location may become less of a sticky point. It's probably the most expensive improvement to make because you actually need to bring people together. But I would argue it's probably not. So if you unplug it, it doesn't mean everything must crumble immediately. Number 4 is also arguable, but what's a long lift? So maybe you can be functional. You can function well if your team is together for 9 months. But if it's only for 9 days, then that's really not a team. You just staple a bunch of people together for just deliver in one sprint. So this is another argument, right? I'm being a devil's advocate here. It is important, but relatively important. It's a very good question. It's a provocative question, Aaron, too, because obviously large scale Scrum is not a magic wand. It's not for everyone. But if you have an organization of 60 people doing work of 20 people with 40 people in between doors, then guess what's going to happen when you put them all in virtual reality? Would you know what they do in between the meetings or on meetings when you and I are talking? Probably not.
No,
Yeah.
thank you. That's fantastic. I mean, one thing I'm hearing some people are implementing is that 80-20 rule, where they already know people are doing what they're doing anyway. So they're saying, well, you might as well, if you're going to do that, you're going to give 20% to some dedicated external activity that's productive, volunteer, whatever it is. So that's something I'm hearing some shops are starting to move to.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. So the Pareto rule 80-20 will be applied probably here as well, because the degree of organizations are excessively cumbersome for the most part, and historically they have been. Right now, I think of as a businessman, think of it as a capitalist or as a stockholder for a public company, or as a sole proprietor for a private company, or maybe as a venture capitalist. If you had your own company, if you put it now online, it has zero visibility into what people do in comfort of their own home offices. would you not become conscious about this inherent organizational complexity built over years? And we have quite a bit of experience with building more effective remote teams. In fact, we have a talk about this in a couple of weeks here on the meetup, not directly related to large scale Scrum, by the way. So. Thank you for the question, folks. I know we at the hour, and I know people are going to start dropping now. Just to make sure you all remember where to find the slides. In fact, they will be posted here. They'll be posted here. If you have any questions, you can always reach out. I'll post them on there's a provisional page, and I'll also make it available in the meetup. Thank you for joining. Hopefully it was useful. And let's look forward for more events. We have a few great speakers coming up in the next couple of weeks from Belgium, and also Diana Larson is coming back in a few weeks. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to wish everyone, happy Tuesday, and enjoy the rest of the week. Okay.
Thank you, Gene.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Very good.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gene. Cheers.
Yep. Everyone.
Bye, Gene.
Cheers.
Oh, a quick thing. You're going to put the all the slides and stuff on the meetup. Is that the best place to get it? Or?
I will communicate in multiple different ways. You won't miss it. Yeah, I'll put it there as well. But I usually load it up on my site. It has there's a capability to upload. But the link is already there. In fact.
Okay. Oh, great. All right. I'll go there. Thank you, sir.
My pleasure.
Yep.